Hello and welcome to Viv and Dave's Real Voices of Happy Valley. In this episode, we're talking to the indomitable Keith Crabtree.
He's fantastic, isn't he?
He is flood warden turned flood volunteer. Keith is one of the people who make sure we stay a happy valley by taking care, him and the other volunteers and flood wardens taking care of the flooding that happens on an all too regular basis in our valley.
And he has his views on the causes of the floods, who's responsible, what can be done about it, and how important local knowledge is.
Yes, make sure you get some and join them, anybody who's interested. We're sitting here in our front room in Todd with Keith Crabtree, who we're delighted to have with us. He's one of the flood wardens who I just think do such an incredible job. And welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
So, do you want to tell us what your role is as a flood warden?
Well, I'm no longer a flood warden. Actually, as a flood warden, I'm now classed as a flood volunteer.
Right.
Because I became a flood warden when I retired from Collardale, having done 25 years with environmental health at Collardale, which dealt with the aftermaths of the floods. But whenever there was a flood in Todd, I was always out. And of course, people said, "Where's the council when we need them?" I said, "I'm here." And the thing is, we could never get people from Halifax because, as you're probably aware, most of the flooding happens on a Friday night, Saturday, weekend,
Right.
when limited resources are available.
It's not something I'd thought about.
Well, it's one thing that does happen,
yeah.
or holidays like Boxing Day, which was obviously one. And of course, the limited resources that are available through the council are, restricting. So when I retired, I thought I'll become a volunteer flood warden. So I signed up with the Environment Agency, and there were only a couple of us in the valley at that particular time. But over the years, they got together 3 flood groups. So there's Todd Flood Group, Ebden Bridge Flood Group, and Mythenroyd Flood Group. And since then, there's 1 or 2 others got together to form groups and try and coordinate the efforts that they've got. The big problem that we've got in Todd is we've got 3 major roads. So you can't be everywhere all at once because there's flooding on practically every road. Burnley Road is not too bad. Halifax Road and Rochdale Road, they suffer quite badly. So you get to know where to put your resources when it comes to it. But my role now is that I keep an eye on the weather. If there's a storm coming up, I'll be on the weather forecasting networks, looking at the river levels, what the predictions are, and I will put it out on Facebook. And that's where people, like the information. But before I start putting information out, I like to have a drive round so that when I do put information on, people can say, "Oh, is this happening? Is that happening?" Well, I've been there. I said I didn't see it or whatever. So it's not second-hand information that I'm giving out. I like to give first-hand information. But when I resigned three years ago, it was because I just got fed up with the attitude of the council and the Environment Agency. You kept telling them why it's flooding and they weren't doing a thing about it. So I thought, why am I wasting my time? Because I did feel as though I was wasting my time, batting a head against a brick wall.
So when you say they didn't listen to why it was happening, why was it happening?
Well, lack of maintenance. Programme things like doing the street gullies. Doing a little bit of dredging on the river, not a massive amount, but there's certain areas where it needs to be done. And we saw that a fortnight ago down at Callis. And the reason why Callis flooded was purely and simply down to neglect. And I went down and I saw the guys clearing it. So I know what it is. I like to get the first-hand information.
Yeah.
And this is it. And people say, "Oh, if the council had cleaned the street gullies out, it'd have been a lot better." It probably wouldn't have been in a major event like Boxing Day. But on a fortnight ago, that was down to blocked gullies. The leaves being still on the ground had congealed over the gullies. Water couldn't get into the gullies, but as soon as you cleared the leaves, water was rushing into the gullies. So it was getting away. But people have got to do that to help themselves. I was down at Eastwood by that time, because we had a flood down there, and we knew how to deal with that flood. And you know very well that council aren't going to come out, because it will take them at least an hour to get out, because the on-call engineer, both of them, live in Todd. So we do get a reasonable service from that point.
Should be a good thing.
But the thing is, they have to go out and have a look, and then they've got to decide what resources have got to be got. But people are no longer on standby anymore. So, they might have been out for a drink that night before. I can't drive, things like that. So
everyone's entitled to go for a drink on Friday night.
Yeah. So realistically, the role of the flood wardens is to help out in the areas, knowing full well that the council aren't going to be there. The blue light services will be, because they're there, and as we saw, they were needed on Woodhouse Road on the Saturday flood a fortnight ago, and because they were down where I was, and said, we've got to shout and we've got to go, get the police involved, Keith. Ring the police. And then they rang back and said, it's you, Keith, is it? I said, yeah. She said, if you're ringing, we know we needed. Right, leave it with us. And that was it. And I never saw one of them, because they went to Callis, because as we know, the road was closed for 2 days down at Callis. So the flood wardens basically are there to help out as best we can. And it is as best we can, because, like I say, we can't be everywhere in one place. Ebden Bridge, Mythenroyd, they've only got sort of one.
And Wollaston the other way.
Well, Wollaston, yeah. But again, being a Todd lad, I know all the areas that flood. Yeah. If somebody says, it's flooding at Wolseley, I know exactly where it's flooding. I mean, I'm a Cornholmer back, originally.
Oh, right.
So I was born and bred up Cornholm, so Cornholm was my adventure playground as a kid. You can't do that, so what you do, you do it just to prove that you can. You're not supposed to walk under the culverts, but we did. But that came in handy after what I class as the first of what I classed as the modern day floods, which was 1982. And it was only this valley that was affected. We had a massive cloudburst over Portsmouth, and we ended up with a tidal wave came down, literally, all the way down. And it damaged 2 houses so much that they had to be demolished. But in order to make the road safe, they had to demolish another 2. The road was shut for 6 weeks. You couldn't get through to Burnley for 6 weeks because of the damage that it had caused. And the amount of debris that was on the side of the road, it was just unbelievable. But I wasn't working for the council then. I'd had a job to do over in Manchester that night, and I got back and I thought, flipping heck, what's this? And I saw it. So I started work the following year in '83 at the council, and they employed a consulting engineer called Burnley. And I got chatting with him, and I told him that we'd walked under culverts as a kid. He says, walk under? He says, you can't crawl under them now. He said, there's that much debris in them. They were full to the brim, all past Wagon Arch, Wagon Arch, past there and all the open courts. They were just full to the brim with debris. And I said, well, if you clear it out, there's a timber base in there. And a few weeks later, he came back to me. He said, yeah, you're right. So local knowledge. Like I say, as an adventure playground as a kid. And of course, they say Burnley Road's flooded. Well, there's the usual places. It floods outside what was the caravan place. Jack's house, that's another area where the Mons Mill officers was. Top Park Gates. That's an area. But again, that's purely and simply down to like a maintenance on the street gullies. All they do is come round and empty them. They don't jet them. The problem is the connection to the sewer. That's not free running. And if it was free running, it would be okay. But this is where we need to have a new strategy when it comes to dealing with street gullies. But it's all down to that, down to money. And money's hard to come by these days. I don't put it onto one government or anything like that,
absolutely.
because whatever government's in power, it tends to be the other way in local government. So the Tories are in power in major one, and then Labour in the local government, and Labour get in, and then it'll be the Tories that take over, or vice versa. And I've seen that right the way through, all the time that I've been allowed to vote, and it's just one of those things, and everybody will blame everybody else, it's so many years of this government and all that. It's the natural thing that they do.
Do you think that's part part of the problem? It's like everyone's blaming everyone else rather than saying, let's get this sorted.
Well, to a certain degree, I do feel that, but ultimately, there's somebody got to pay for it. But the general maintenance thing comes out of the council budgets. But as we've seen, all the capital investments, like the 54 million that was spent in Mythenroyd, that came from the Environment Agency, put it in a scheme together, and then central government funded it. But they couldn't have funded it themselves, and doing the work that's necessary, it would come out of their budget, and they just don't have that sort of budget. They've got to do the schemes, and of course these schemes take ages to work up. I mean, they're currently working on one to try and alleviate the flooding at Walsden, which will stop the flooding near what was the Cross Keys, and also down towards the station, and also hopefully do the railway. But they were doing all the work on the computer, and they said it wasn't working. They weren't getting a solution. So they contacted me and said, can we meet up on site? I said, yeah, of course we can. He said, because you know the area. So I said, yeah, no problem. We spent 2 hours just with one man, and he said, we showed him this and this and this. He said, no wonder it's not working. He said, because there's loads more water that we didn't even know about. Little streams that add to it. And of course, in the event of a major rainfall, those streams they're not trickles. They
become big streams.
Yeah, they become big streams. So they're working on that, but they've got to try and come up with a scheme that's cost effective. So it's no point in coming up with a £50 million scheme to sort out half a dozen properties. If they can do a £5 million scheme that does couple of hundred properties, then that's more likely to get the go-ahead. But the majority of it now is all computer modelling, and that was the thing, it just wasn't working. So and we've still got to come through with Hebden Bridge. We've had the big scheme in Mythenroyd, we've had a couple of big schemes in Todd.
Which seems to have worked.
Yeah.
The Mythenroyd one is amazing, isn't it?
I mean, when we saw the photographs, and I looked at the river levels didn't come up anywhere near, but think about it, the river's been widened by half as much again. So if they hadn't have widened it, that would have wiped Mythenroyd out, in my opinion.
Absolutely, because it was only a matter of inches.
It was, yeah. But it does seem to have worked. So all the years of the traffic, that was absolutely crazy. Going up and down the valley and getting caught up in that, but it does appear to have worked, and it looks quite nice now.
Yeah.
All right, the big high stone walls, but
they've got those little windows in, so you can see.
Yeah, unless the idiots go and smash them, which they have done. But Hebden Bridge, they're still working on the Hebden Bridge scheme, so that's due to start next year. So
what are they going to do?
The main problem with Hebden Bridge is the confluence of Hebden water and the River Calder, because they go together and then they go under an aqueduct under the canal, and it's only a very small aperture, and of course what it does, it causes it all to back up. But of course after the 2015 floods, the Environment Agency don't like dredging of the river, but they did do in Hebden Bridge, and if you look at Hebden Bridge now, it's quite a nice looking river, and there's a lot of wildlife on it. The only thing was, when they threw the ducks in for the duck race, they just came down in one wave sort of thing, and whereas previously they'd all been split up and they were easy to catch. But so
I don't think the Rotary Club complained too much.
No, because they're getting the money out of it, and it's a good day for Hebden Bridge to do it, But the one of the other things is that the Calder Valley, we've got more sirens than most places in the country. People say, that's haunting sound, it's like being back in the war. Well, that's what it's there for. It's designed to let people know. And of course the thing is, when sirens go off, realistically you've got 20 minutes and flooding will be occurring. And of course on the Saturday the sirens went off twice. Because the rivers were rising really rapidly. I've seen them rise rapidly, but they rose very, very quickly on that day. But as soon as it stops, they also go down very quickly.
That's true.
Yes,
but when you get the flooding, it's not just the flooding; it's what it leaves behind. It's an absolute mess.
Yeah.
We saw some debris near Bacup, between Bacup and Whitworth.
Bacup flooded last week. Yeah.
Well, I was in Mythenroyd on that Saturday. we're setting up a stage for the lights coming on.
Right,
and
yeah.
everything. We just sound checked a band, and the siren went off, and Emma from the council came and said, "Everybody go home."
Yeah.
But of course, the new Collis was closed.
Yeah.
And went up to Crabtree. By the time we got anywhere near Wollaston, that was closed.
Well, you can get through at Walsden, but the thing is, they ended up, all the buses were stopped. And of course, they ended up bringing buses back over Ollins Road. Well, it's a 4-ton limit on the bridge at Ollins Road over the canal. Well, the buses are 7 ton at least. So, but there were no passengers on them. But we had one occasion where the train came and it got into the water, but then got to Winter Butley Tunnel, and then they had to walk it through the tunnel, because once the railhead disappears underwater, they're not allowed to drive trains over it. And they got into Walsden, and it was a Transpennine one that was coming from Manchester Airport to Leeds, and all the staff were there, Northern Rail, Transpennine Express, or Network Rail, the lot. And they said, "Oh, we don't know whether we can get to Leeds." I said, "You've come through flood now." I said, "Everything else is elevated. Just get through." I said, "You shouldn't have any problems." And he said to the driver, "Are you happy to drive it?" He said, "I've got to get back to Leeds anyway, so I might as well drive it." Again, that's where your local knowledge comes in.
Yeah.
And this is fundamental with the floods. And as a result, I've got a phone call from the fire service on Monday asking for a bit of advice relating to the lad that got trapped in his car that had to rescue his baby.
That was up Woodhouse.
That's Woodhouse Road, yeah. So I decided I'd go up and have a look after having a chat, and then I went to the Mitsubishi factory, the Mitsubishi Plastics, which was polyhigh solid ore as it was originally, and I went in there and spoke to a guy. "Oh, it's Keith." I said, "Yeah." "Oh, we were watching all your posts on Facebook, and then we can get on the camera and see whether we are flooding." And of course, Woodhouse Road itself was flooded over the canal bridge. And I said, "Did your factory flood?" So we had a walk round and we tell him, and then the manager came out. He said, "What are you doing here, Keith?" And practically everybody at factory knew me. So,
well, I mean, the one thing that I'm aware people do, when there's flooding or they feel there's a dangerous flooding, they used to look for your posts on Facebook.
And I try not to be. I try to be calm in it, because when flooding happens, it's not something that's nice. It isn't. It's horrible, because you can't do a thing about it until it's stopped, and then when you do, once it's stopped, it's the clean up. And basically, it's all your ground floor, throw it all out and start again.
Well, we used to live up at Dodnays, up above Hebden, and we were out of our house for 3 months.
2012, I think that one was it,
Yeah.
And
Didn't expect that.
It just came down through the houses at the top. And
we
we lived right in the middle on the corner, and it was... the water doesn't turn at 90 degrees.
No.
So it just came through a couple of houses. And me and a couple of neighbours were just busy trying to build a dam at the back of our house. And then we realised, all we were doing was pushing it into Paul's house next door.
Yeah.
So we just gave up.
Well, I went down to Hebden Bridge on that flood, and folks said, "Have you been up Dodnays?" I said, "It's on hill." I said, "Get up there." And I went up, and of course the houses at the back that are across the hillside, they were the ones where they just opened the back door, opened the front door and let it through. And luckily it didn't cause too much damage because it ran through, but the playground was submerged. Locals ended up taking the curbs out so that the water would drain away.
And it's so powerful, the water.
Oh no, that's what people don't understand.
Looking out onto Birchcliff Road that went past our house, Wadsworth Lane. And I saw this huge black thing sticking up, and I thought, my first thought was, is that a shark? And then I realised it was a tarmac that had been ripped up by the water. And just incredible, the power of it, isn't
but
it?
again, it's the local knowledge is important, because the people in Dodnays knew where to go up and try and build a barrier up above them. Not too late for some of those houses, but for the next day, and knew which drains to sort of rip up. Because the other Saturday, I was like all the way up Craig Road. People were just people were sort of having a go at the drains, and they knew where the ponds were. I ended up coming through Bacup And all the way around, there was like
people,
either building barricades or knocking on neighbours' doors saying, "Get out."
Yeah.
And what you say about the drains, that was true. Because I said to you, up on the road up above Bake up towards Cliffordshire, it was pouring out of the drain. It was like a fountain in the middle of the road.
I mean, you're probably aware that Calderdale's 50 years old this year. It was 50 years since it was formed. Yeah. And going back to the year that we were formed, all the various local authorities, Todd, Hebden Bridge, and Ellen, Brighouse and all that, they all had their own teams. Mm-hmm. And there were in excess of 24 gully wagons available in those days. Right. We've got 2 now.
Yeah.
And those are contract.
Yeah. I bet you don't miss the bureaucracy, do you? Yeah.
No, there was one occasion, Captain, I think it was on a Friday night, as it usually does, and I was out there in the thick of it, and of course I was invited to one of the wash-up meetings in the town hall with the chief exec chairing it, and they were all managers. And they were all saying, "Oh, we did this and we did that and we did this and we did that," and all that. And I listened to everything, and I just put my hand up and said, "I've listened to all this." I said, "But I was actually out in it. All right, I was at Todd." And of course, to try and get stuff to Todd from there is difficult because you're coming through the flooded areas. First of all, Mythen Road, then Hebden Bridge, then Callis. So, it would case of come the other way. I said, the only council vehicles that I saw were Lancashire County Council, and they were coming out to their own area to deal with us. Well, the room just went dead silent because it were all managers. I was the only one that was what I used to class as one of the workers, and I was always out. People say, "Where's the council when you want them?" I said, "I'm here," and that's it. And I got no authority. All I could do was report back to the emergency planning officer, and it was up to him then to get the necessary resources going. There was another occasion where the chief exec came up on the Sunday. He says, "Keith," he says, where's all our lot?" I said, "I told them last night." Within the hour they were there because he just said, "Get them here." I didn't have that authority. All I can say, this is what we need. But once he'd seen what was going on, they were there. And
so now that you've gone from flood warden to volunteer, does that make a difference?
It does. Yeah. It means that I'm not going out all hours at day and night.
Right.
I can do most of what I need to do in the comforts of my own home because I can be watching the weather radar, can be watching the rivers, looking outside and seeing what's happening, and you get a good feel as to what it's like. But in the event of a major flood like we had a fortnight ago on the Saturday, I did put myself out. But like I said earlier, I like to have a drive around so that I can witness it firsthand. And as I was driving round, I got down to Halifax Road and the traffic was backed up. I knew what the problem was, got my Wellingtons on, got my shovel out and went to try and deal with it. Then my colleague, the flood warden, did come down. He went down to Callis. 20 minutes later he come back, he said, we've shut it. It's 2 foot deep in water. So we knew that we knew. There are volunteers, but they are to a certain degree thin on the ground, as with everything, because they drop off when there's nothing happening, But then when something does happen, then a lot more people come out and want to help out afterwards. Luckily, on these occasions, there was nothing major to do because properties didn't get affected. There were 1 or 2. But nothing major, like Boxing Day. I mean, Boxing Day in 2020, those were when properties did get hammered. And I mean, like at Hebden Bridge after the Boxing Day event, there were hundreds of people came from all over the country, and not one of them had to pay for any food or drink.
No, that was fantastic.
It was all given.
I remember somebody saying being flooded is terrible, but the food's great.
But the thing was, at Todd, we had full cooking facilities, so they were having food donated. So they think, what we've got today, well, we can make this today, and it was hot food. So I've been working down at Hebden Bridge, but coming back up to Todd for something to eat.
So generally, are you open to having more volunteers and wardens?
The thing is,
people know about that.
Yeah, if you want to become a flood warden, realistically, you've got to get in touch with Tomlin Flood Group. They will then put them forward so that you're authorised by the Environment Agency, because you are a volunteer on behalf of the Environment Agency.
Yeah,
and that was another good thing. After the 2015 floods, we were at the town hall on one of the wash-up meetings, and these Environment Agency people came in with brand new high-vis jackets on, and the guy said, "Oh, Keith's here, great, we'll go and have a chat with Keith." So I didn't a clue who I was talking to. So me and the other flood warden that from the early days, we took them out and about. And as they were leaving, they said, "Well, you've been very, very good with all that." And I said, "But what's your position? Are you one of the local managers?" He said, No, I'm Sir Philip Dilly, the chairman. He'd come back from Barbados off his holidays, pure and simple.
Right.
And he resigned a few weeks later. And of course, the lady took over. And the next time I saw her, I said, I feel I need to apologise because I was a little bit flippant with you. She said, "No." She said, "We don't deal with the public." She said, "We deal with the managers and everything, but you put it over to us in exactly the way that the people were affected."
Well, so people up and down the valley then can contact Todd, Hebden Bridge or Merthyr Road flood groups.
Yes,
depending through Facebook.
Yeah, they've got Facebook pages, all the three groups.
Yeah.
So
because people do want to help, don't they?
Well,
especially if they've been affected themselves, they realise just how devastating a flood
one of the problems that you've got is that quite a lot of the flood wardens live in the flood affected areas, and for obvious reasons they're going to look after their own property before they start helping other people, and can understand that. Whereas me, I'm in a top floor flat. So if I get flooded, the town's had it. Even though technically I'm in a flood zone, but if, like I say, if my area floods, we've all had it.
So if people find themselves flooded or in danger of being flooded, what's the best thing to do? Obviously, look on Facebook to...
Well, that's one of the things that most people tend to do, but in a lot of cases they might get hold of the neighbours and things like that. And that's when the community comes together and everybody helps each other out. But if you're wanting to help out other people, then join the group to start with, and get the necessary training. There's a little bit of training and this sort of thing. And every year they do a flood wardens group at Leeds at the Environment Agency local headquarters, and they go through various scenarios and stuff like that, trying to keep people up to date with what's going on.
Great. And do you have fundraising events? Do you need to fundraise?
That is one of the things that they do need to fundraise, because the first thing that they tend to have is clean up materials.
Right.
And so they have a container which has got stuff like that. We don't tend to put sandbags in like at one time, because the sandbags, they go in damp, they stay damp, and everything else just gets a mould on it. So we don't tend to keep sandbags. But one of the flood wardens, he's got the biggest supply of sandbags in the area. The thing is funding. That there is sometimes funding after a major event for people to put flood defences in and make the house flood resilient. If you can't stop the flood, then the only way to do is make it resilient. They did a massive amount in the Community Foundation for Collardale. They did. The amount of funds that they raised, of course it ended up getting match funded as well. So what was 2 million ended up 4 million, which came in very handy.
Yeah.
And that was mainly for the victims.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Keith.
Right. Yes, really interesting.
Thanks a lot. And well done to you and the other volunteers.
Well, it was great to talk to you, Keith.
That's all right.
Thanks for that.
No problem.